Alex is a Chief Financial Officer of Tipolis, a firm that builds in free cities projects. He has a background in investment banking and joined Titus Gable as the CFO of Tipolis Corporation from its beginning. Alex lives in Chicago and is working to expand the ideas of the foundation to the Americas. He studied economics and finance at University of Chicago and Notre Dame and holds the CFA charter. More recently, Alex has formalized his study of Austrian economics under the tutelage of the Mises Institute. Please put your hands together for Alex Voss.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Nice to be with you all. My talk today is somewhat different than the other ones. It's maybe a bit more technical. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But the idea really is to give you an example of how we think at Tipolis about the operations of building a free city. It's sort of a hard idea to get your mind around for many people, and so I thought maybe some simple examples might help concretize the idea for everyone here. So I think basically there are two major reasons why you might consider investing in a free city project. One is sort of the moral case, which I think in this room is maybe the easier one to make. And so I'll go through that quickly, and then we'll turn to the economic case, and I'll try to explain how we think about it. So as you all have heard, there's of course a lot of issues in the world right now. The reason we're all here is because we believe there needs to be parallel structures. These can be in a number of different aspects, as we've heard about. And so we think really free cities are the way to do that in terms of allowing people to live the life that they'd like to. So the three main parallel structures that we've talked about this weekend are Bitcoin, education, and free cities. And while all of them are quite important, I think they fundamentally fall into three different categories. Bitcoin, of course, there are companies within Bitcoin, but it's largely a monetary system. It's how we save, it's how we transact. It's somewhat less businessy than some of the other structures. Education is, of course, very, very philanthropic. It can be run like a business, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of philanthropy involved in education. It's something that people often spend a fair amount of capital on once they've earned it, and that's perfectly fine. Free cities are fundamentally different. They are genuinely business opportunities here and now. And so I think when you think about where capital should be allocated, you have your savings, you have your philanthropy, and then you have your investments. And so I think free cities is really fundamentally the last one. When we think about free cities, we're not necessarily trying to solve all issues. In fact, we're really trying to solve just one, and that is so that human beings can act in the world and be free to do what they'd like to do. The way we think about it is we want to find a very, very basic service. We want to ensure that people are free to do exactly what they'd like to do. So we want basically to get out of the way. Just set the platform and everything else would follow. If you just create a space for people to go about their business, we think that that's the foundation for everyone to entrepreneurs to be successful in building their Bitcoin businesses, to build education systems, to build their restaurants, other types of business. But free cities are a business opportunity in the here and now. So how does a free city actually make money? So this is more of the economic case. The way we think about it, there are two main ways. One is a recurring fee from residents. They could be citizens, they could be businesses, they could be e-residents. And the other is really the real estate appreciation. So consider a hypothetical city. We expect, for example, in this city, the GDP per capita is, call it, 50,000 euros. If you consider a city of 35,000 people, that makes the GDP of the city about 1.75 billion. And you can see some of those numbers up there, African GDP, US, Switzerland, Monaco. So I think 50,000, sure, we can argue about what it should be, but in this hypothetical case, I think 50,000 seems reasonable. Then down towards the bottom, you can see if the city operator charges about 2,000 euros in a fee for 35,000 people, that's net governance spending of about $70 million. That's 4% of the GDP of the city. Down at the bottom, you can see those percentages there. That's what those countries spend on governance. You can see the US almost 50. You can see Czech Republic here and France up to 60, even relatively efficient Switzerland, that's 36%. If we cut that down to 4%, think about how much capital that opens up for other businesses, for other opportunities. So now from the city operator perspective, if you have 35,000 people in a city, and if we're charging 2,000 euros per person, that's $70 million, or 70 million euros, excuse me, in recurring revenue. As I mentioned, our philosophy is really to get out of the way of entrepreneurs and humans. So we have minimal welfare and minimal warfare. Those are usually the most expensive services to provide. At the same time, the city would be run by a for-profit company, so they're subject to profit and loss. At the same time, is that better? Okay. At the same time, the for-profit company would be subject to profit and loss calculations and incentives. So that doesn't mean that the for-profit company is going to make the right decision. In fact, they'll make plenty of wrong decisions, I'm sure of it. But they have to reap the rewards and the loss based on those decisions. So they're going to be relatively efficiently run. And if you look at some of the municipalities around the world, relatively efficient municipalities, of course, they're very capital intensive, but if you're talking about just operating, sort of OpEx, they can be run very, very profitably, on the order of magnitude of 35 to 50% even. On the other hand, if you look at the real estate value that can be added, if you buy land in a country that has less development, less sort of operating development, so maybe not the greatest rule of law, you can buy cheap land, you can develop the physical infrastructure, and that land is going to appreciate in value. Then you improve the legal certainty and the regulatory environment, and that land can appreciate even further. Based on some of the research we've done, and this is certainly just an example, but I think it's at least directionally correct. Certainly we can debate numbers and look at them in more detail, but you can see over on the left-hand side, if you buy land and you simply improve it, develop it into a more attractive area, even within the same sort of region, you can see an increase in land value of 18 to even 160 times, not percent, times. And that's just over on the left-hand side. Now, free cities don't want to be mediocre. The idea is to create world-renowned cities. So over on the right, there's a couple examples of real estate values in some of these very famous, famous big cities that people like to move to. When you move over to the right side, you can see that the land appreciation is much, much higher. The Seychelles is the furthest most on the right, on the left-hand chart, and then the furthermost left, just so that you can see that we've changed the axis. So you can see appreciation of 8,000 times. Now, I'm not suggesting that's likely to happen. I'm not suggesting that anyone should model a business on that, but it is to show sort of categorically what type of numbers that we're talking about. And you can see here just some basic calculations. If you bought 2 million euros worth of land and you saw this type of appreciation, you can see what the value of it would be based on those types of appreciation. Now the next two slides do show some numbers. I'll try to keep it very, very simple. Down at the bottom, you can see the number of residents and the number of companies in a city. Up at the very top, you can see the year, so year 3, year 6, and year 15. I just picked these more or less arbitrarily. And you can see if we charge 2,000 euros per person per year, the type of revenue that we're generating. Now, I would grant you that a 30% operating margin is very unlikely in the beginning years, but I do think that later on that's reasonable to achieve. And so you can see in year 3, generating about 1.2 million in revenue, but by year 15, once the residents and the companies are up and running, you're generating, what is that, 85 million? This is real money. Now, it has to be compared against the heavy capital investment, of course, that goes into building a city, but it is a genuine business that's generating cash flows and operating income even of about 25.5 million by year 15. So you can play around with the numbers on something like this, but just to keep it simple, I think that can show that the value that a free city can generate. Now, changing the assumptions just a little bit, we build a city that ends up with 100,000 people, 10,000 companies. It runs a little bit more efficiently. We're talking about in year 20, in this case, a free city company that's generating $440 million of revenue each year. And this is just simply paying $4,000 in fees per resident per year. I don't know about you, but I'd be happy to pay that as my tax. You can see over on the right, too, based on just a couple of basic assumptions, if you have 100,000 people and you charge 4,000 euros, assume a cost of capital of 10%, certainly we can talk about whether that's appropriate or not. You can really get a present value of that company of over $1 billion. So free cities really could be the next unicorn, depending on the assumptions that you want to make. Beyond just the numbers, I think the other reason to consider investments in free cities is the demand for new alternatives is obviously increasing. This conference has grown year after year. There's, of course, interest from all of you. There's interest in my own day-to-day life. I hear people asking for alternatives, not just in governance, but of course in education and finance, and that's what we're here to talk about. And so this industry is really very, very young and seemingly growing very quickly. This new asset class is something I like to call venture estate. It's got a little bit of the qualities of venture capital. It's very high risk. I don't claim that any of this is low risk. At the same time, it's in large part, as we saw, a real estate play. And so you have some of the downside protections of developing physical real estate in the real world. It's unlikely to go to zero. It could certainly go down. But at the same time, there's significant upside, as we saw with some of those previous couple of slides. Of course, free cities are a great diversifying investment that you might consider. And even more so, they're counter-cyclical, it would seem. Just when the world is going the most crazy, more people are attracted to these ideas, more people are looking for different alternatives. That means more demand for people that would be interested in moving to and living in a free city. And so I think one of the biggest reasons you might consider for investing in free cities is that you can get into a project now when this idea is still very young. It's a little bit like if you were to invest in, say, Shenzhen before they became a special economic zone. I would have liked to have a piece of that, only to see what they've become now. And I don't claim each free city will achieve this, but certainly some may. And being at the front end of that would certainly be both financially rewarding as well as morally rewarding. It's a lot like the Bitcoiners like to say, imagine investing in a piece of the internet when it started. I think there's some parallels to free cities as well. And so in conclusion, I would say certainly these are very, very risky investments. They're not for everyone. You're very much on the front end of this. It is easy to be wrong with timing, but if you're right and you want to invest in a free city, certainly they're high risk, but with risk can come reward, both morally in terms of achieving a better world and a platform and a forum for people to live and build, but also financially. And that's why we think free cities presents a realistic business opportunity for people to consider over the coming years. I think I have about 5 minutes left if we want to ask any questions.
One question.
You mentioned the cost of warfare, but any free city has to pay for defense somehow, usually to the host country. So are you just assuming that the host country is going to have a very low-cost military? How does that work?
Well, I think it can work in a number of different ways depending on the location and the situation. Partially, you might pick a relatively safer region. Certainly, defense spending, legitimately defense spending, is cheaper than offensive spending. It's much easier to keep people out than it is to go sail around the world. So I think that's one thing. Certainly, a host nation might provide some defense in the short run. It might also be that residents of a new city feel a very particular attachment to that city and they want to sort of be the militia themselves. That doesn't mean that they can fight off the US military, but just create enough of a cost to be a low, not an easy target. Certainly it's something that you have to budget for and provide for, but I don't see that as prohibitive. And we're done? Okay. Thank you very much.